It is that time of year again, folks, as we prepare for an abundance of turkey, ham and Premier League football. Ruben Amorim has plenty to reflect upon following a defeat after a promising showing at Villa Park, ahead of the arrival of Newcastle on Friday evening. We are touching on all of that, your questions and more, on the final Theatre of Red episode of 2025. You are all very welcome to the final episode of the year as we prepare to slow down just a small bit during the festive period. How is everything on your end, first and foremost? Are you all ready? Have you got the presents packed? Is everything good to go? Because it's not here, or at least I don't think it is anyway. I'll have to ask my wife about that. Unfortunately, Manchester United fell to defeat at Villa Park for only the second time in 30 years. With the informed Morgan Rogers ultimately proving the difference on the day. And what a talent he is, by the way. I don't think there's any escaping that. You know, when I was looking at him, I've seen bits and pieces this season, but I really focused against United. He actually reminds me a lot of Rashford during that 22-23 season, when every single thing that Marcus touched turned to gold. Now, I saw similar movements, similar traits in what he did. Ultimately, providing very little other than two worldly finishes, it's fair to say. But that is the nature of the beast that is the Premier League, the fickle little minx, like I always say. Sometimes you don't have to get yourself about all that much. It's just about that moment of quality, and unfortunately we saw it twice. I did write afterwards that despite the defeat, the majority of the fan base were feeling something other than the typical anger and agenda-driven intentions that we regularly see sprawled across social media every single week. A 2-1 loss in a game where Ruben Amorim ultimately got the better of Unai Emery for the majority. United dominated Villa for the majority, and the defining differences were a repetition of our struggles in front of goal and Lenny Yoro not getting tight enough to Rodgers, who hit the net twice with goals worthy of winning any game in any league. No one is going to dispute that, really, are you? This was a winnable fixture. And when you're looking at the opportunities from Benjamin Sesko and Matheus Cunha that were not put away, especially at the times of both, because that can always have such a telling outcome on any fixture. They have the ability to transform any fixture, and particularly that. And it's such a shame because I spoke about it in last week's episode. Many people who would have been watching that game were unaware that despite Villa's incredible run, which is excellent, there's just no denying that, 22 home wins in 27 matches in all competitions, but they have been extremely fortunate in many of those games, particularly against West Ham, because I was covering that one. They continue to profit from moments of magic, just as we saw on Sunday. You know yourself, there's only so long that can last, and I would expect Villa to fizzle out of the title race at the very, very least as the season continues. But naturally, it's very frustrating to lose, particularly when we saw a side missing so many players before a ball was even kicked. You're looking at Matthias de Ligt, Harry Maguire, Nasser Mazraoui, Kobbie Mainoo, Casemiro, Bryan Mbeumo, Ahmad, and then to lose Bruno Fernandes at the interval. It just adds to the growing selection worries that Amorim is facing. However, as I also said last week, and I wrote about afterwards, I felt that Villa and the upcoming fixtures were going to be an opportunity for the squad, and some of those would-be fringe players to flex their muscles and really unleash their qualities, the qualities that brought them to Manchester in the first place. I know Ruben is missing half of his first-team selection at this stage of the season, but there is still options there. Some of them are quality, albeit few remaining, who can comply to his requirements. We are off the back of a crazy draw with Bournemouth, and then a very good performance at Villa Park. But we've seen two promising attacking displays from multiple attractive passages of interplay and calculated transitions. And that all came alongside a very tidy high press, particularly from Mason Mount. As you saw through those two fixtures, there was 40 shots and 10 key saves from opposition goalkeepers, and only 5 goals scored. Now, when you consider the inability to collect any form of clean sheets, we're heading into games knowing that 1 goal will likely not be enough. So witnessing Cunha deliver a 5-yard header wide, or a recently returning Sesko failing to slot his one-on-one past an onrushing Martinez. These are telling blows during fixtures. Not only do they inspire confidence in the opposition, but they add a little bit of doubt in an attacking line that has become accustomed to a lack of clinical finishing. It was that similar scenario against Bournemouth in a game where we should have been 3 or 4 up at the break. And then that's the game done and dusted. Regardless, though, I know managers are judged on results, and a point from a possible 6 is the last thing that we need to see. But when considering every variable that I have just discussed, I think there are far more positives than negatives when you look at both displays. And I believe that is what has got a semblance of hope humming in the fan base, despite uncertainty about selections because of injuries and international commitments.
I think everybody saw that too. We were the better team today. We were unlucky, even with the injury of Bruno. But during the game, even without Bruno, we were the better team. We blocked quite well the transitions, 1-against-1 all the time. And they did really well. So I think we did a very good job that no one is going to remember tomorrow, because what matters is the result.
Well, I remember Ruben, and I'm sure plenty of the listeners do, as does a huge proportion of the fan base. But he did mention the injury to Fernandes there, and that supplies the most unwanted of headaches. You know, often when I speak about Bruno, or have defended him in the past, I refer back to his ever-ready status and how the greatest attribute of any footballer is availability, and he's the definition of this. He's missed 3 games since arriving in England through illness and that knee injury that we know about. Now, on one hand, your mind immediately shuffles to the opening that this presents for Kobbie Mainoo, and then you realise that he's collected a setback also, and that's likely going to keep him out of the Newcastle games. So you just talk about luck there, really, don't you? Or a lack of it. Emmanuel Ugarte, I think it's fair to say he looked poor in many stages at Villa Park, and that's putting it lightly. And whether this is ring rust or a lack of belief or just highlighting maybe his inability to play in England, I don't know. But the one factor that shone through in Bruno's absence was the emergence of a fit again Lisandro Martinez, coming in as a defensive midfielder of all things. Now, plenty in the press box around me questioned Amorim's decision at half-time, with many speculating about how United would inevitably fall off as a result of this decision. But as we saw, this was not the case, as United continued to dominate throughout the second half. Now, I'm not saying that Licha is the solution to a midfield dilemma, but this is something that I remember speaking about years ago on an episode of the Stretty Cast with Brian and Dale. If any of you listened, I'm sure you did. Forget about switching mid-game. Martinez has started 22 fixtures in his professional career as a DM, and when you factor his ball distribution, it's easy to see why a manager would revert to him during a time of need. Now, I'm not going over the top in saying this, but he is amongst the best ball-playing defenders in Europe, and his metrics back this up. That's not just me saying this, the figures never lie. He was in the very elite of the Premier League players up to his injury last season, and he is a crucial cog when fit for Amorim's system. You look at that game against Villa, 29 of his 32 passes were complete. 18 of 21 of those in the opposition half, and even 1 from 3 long balls. And that all came from 38 touches at Villa Park in 45 minutes, while winning 2 tackles, 2 ground duels, 3 ball recoveries, and 1 clearance. I've said it before, and I will say it again. Maybe, just maybe, Ruben knows what he's doing, people. Regardless, I can't see him lining out in midfield against Newcastle. I could be wrong. But given the need for experience and a veteran head in defence, that's maybe where he would come in. But that leads to a question from Peter Hall that was sent through to editor at theatre-of-red.com. He says, having youthful options across the team is great, particularly with Aidan Heaven and Lenny Yoro in defence. But I can't help but feel that Heaven has progressed far greater in a shorter period of time than Yoro, and I am starting to get a little concerned. How do you feel about both? And can you see Yoro making the grade at Old Trafford? And thank you for getting in touch, Peter. You know, I do appreciate the concern, and it's a valid observation, given that Yoro was the one beaten by Rodgers for both goals. Now, Heaven was obviously more impactful than Yoro at Villa Park, and he's shown in everything from interceptions, clearances, block shots, duels. But the defining visual, I think, for me, is his willingness to get stuck in physically. It's getting stuck in kind of a Premier League style that we're all accustomed to. But that has come from a football education that has been delivered at home, whereas the upbringing is more technically minded on the continent. There is no escaping that. But both guys are young. We must remember this. And we must also remember how much Lenny was shining in a defensive line alongside a more physical De Ligt before his injury. And that cannot be underplayed. I do believe that Yoro will overcome this little blip that he's enduring. And there is every chance that both of these players can grow into a formidable partnership at the club. They have all the raw materials and they will continue to grow physically. It is understandable how people would begin to turn on Yoro. And I'm not saying that you are, by the way, just let me clarify that. But I do see quite a lot of it on social media. Sometimes players need to be removed from a situation for their own good. But obviously, given the injuries that we have, there is no opportunity to do so. You know, when I touch on that, I also feel that it's worthwhile noting that when Amorim previously opted to take Lenny out for a spell, he was abused left, right, and centre for not playing, while many people were calling the best defender at the football club. Plenty of those people, they've since changed their tune in recent weeks, but their words and actions cannot be erased. I know this is just my opinion, but I believe Lenny will come good again very soon. And I believe that he will benefit very much from the likes of Martinez returning, and particularly when he can rekindle that growing relationship that I just referenced with De Ligt, because I think both complement each other so much. As for Heaven, I can only hope that he grasps onto this confidence and this self-belief that he clearly possesses, because we've inherited a sensationally talented footballer here. You know, when you step back, I can only imagine that the Arsenal fan base are sick to their stomachs with what they're witnessing here and what they've lost. But then this all ties in with youth, nurturing talent and not rushing the advancement of academy players when it's unnecessary, but then also recognizing when a player is ready and willing and able. Whether Johnny on Twitter feels that a particular youngster needs to be introduced before that. We've previously covered Jack Fletcher and Shea Lacey on the Theatre of Red. We've done so for some time. And we released articles over the last month about both of them because we were advised of their impending introduction on the senior stage. You see, that's what we do. It's what we've always done since we started. We attempt to educate anybody who takes the time to listen here or to read the content on the website about inside matters that we receive, because we regularly speak with people on the ground. And we try to do so without releasing what so many other people indulge with inside information to gather a few followers. Immediately, people jump into the comment section of these posts to lambaste the manager and then state that the youngsters won't be given an opportunity, because it all goes along with what Amorim stated about his sense of entitlement amongst the juvenile audience. Now, seeing both of the young lads make their senior debuts, that was the 255th and 256th, by the way, in a long line to bolster the club's traditions. How can that not warm your heart massively? But allow me to just state, I can assure you this, these are not token appearances. They're not token gestures. Both have truly impressed with their work rate in training, their commitment to improving their physical stature, as is the requirement in England. And there's an agreed recognition from the coaching team about their qualities despite their ages. You could see the belief in both of them within minutes. And I think that was typified by Lacey's long-range effort with one of his first touches. That is not just personal belief. Those players are being encouraged every step of the way. Their manager believes in them. So trust me when I say, Amorim is well aware of the benefits of promoting from within and taking the decision to hold back on youth, as he has done several times with Yoro. And although some choose to fire further nonsense for a lack of academy selections, he remains totally committed to balancing youth and experience without jeopardising the advancement of any. I know some might listen to that and will then point to Kobbie Mainoo and his situation, but like I stated about Fletcher and Lacey, there are very few people who understand what's happening behind the scenes. And it's best to keep personal opinions personal. I promise you that.
It's the history of the club. If you see, I know that I'm manager for just 6 years, I think. And it's all about, even Sporting is all about the academy. So every manager wants to bring players from the academy, not spend money, because this gives value to the play to the manager. I just want to win. I just want to be certain that the players that come in from the academy are not going to suffer too much. So I'm just trying to help the club. It doesn't matter if it's from the academy or abroad.
We've touched on Bruno and his injury, and hopefully we won't see a prolonged period on the sidelines. But this somewhat presents another contingent of naysayers with their dream of seeing a Manchester United side without the captain pulling the strings. Now, admittedly, it would be a hell of a lot better to have ample options to select from. But where we are today is where we are today. Casemiro will most certainly return to the middle of the park after his suspension. And with Manu likely to miss out further through a calf injury, you got to ask who fills the void of the Portuguese Magnifico. Looking at it and trying to be as pragmatic as I can, I find it hard to see a world where Ugarte retains his spot. I could be wrong though. He may come back in and the manager might want him to play through some bad form. Outside of him, it might be a little bit much pressure to place on the shoulders of Fletcher, who is that quintessential number 10 by nature. Maybe, given the technical skill set that he possesses, we'll see Mason Mount drop back to partner Casemiro, inadvertently opening the door for Xerxes to slot in beside Cunha. Now, as you are undoubtedly aware at this stage, I've been supporting Mount since he arrived, and his qualities are being applauded almost weekly now, which is great to see. But whether on injuries or international duty, the squad is obviously suffering. That's there for all to see. I've previously spoken about transfer intentions at the club and how January would likely be quiet due to a combination of finances and also retaining eyes on the grander plan of summer. But everything that we have discussed has played a part in conversations internally in recent weeks. That's what we are told. And the one name that continues to surface is Antoine Semenyo. And answering a query from Paul Oslowy on Twitter, he remains a name of intense interest at the football club. This is not solely related to the injury dilemma that we're discussing, but the fact that interested parties who would like to avail of his signature in January with a favourable fee must trigger his release clause within the first 10 days of the opening of the window. And that is why we have witnessed multiple reports about a potential fight to sign the player amongst City, Liverpool, United and more. Now, as I've stated before, the club has big plans for the summer, but it would be open to accelerating those plans for a specific player earlier if it wouldn't induce a financial dilemma. So we all know from public comments, Amorim loves Semenyo. I mean, he even alluded to that in the build-up to the game. But this is a player that has plenty of options on the table, and the ball is very much in his court. Paul asked if I have any intel on a potential transfer. Now, I have nothing other than the club retains interest, very much so. Would like to bring him to the club because they see him as a complementing attacker who is also versatile. We speak about that left wing-back position. That said, although a wide player is on the wish list, central midfield remains the priority. But the likelihood of taking an Elliot Anderson from Forest mid-season is extremely low, however. And you have to ask the question, would adding a player of Semenyo's quality aid this squad for the second half of the season, even though it's not fit to the number one priority? I think my answer and your answer is going to be yes. Now, Amorim has emphasised the importance of not making mistakes in the upcoming windows. And this is the fine line that they're playing at the moment. Would allowing a player of this calibre to join a rival fall into the bracket of making an error in this window? And regardless of what the club wants and what is deemed a priority, if you're asking me would I move for Semenyo in January, the answer is a definitive yes. But as I said, he has options elsewhere, so there is nothing done and dusted and assured about this. And that, I believe, will bring us on nicely to our latest Old Trafford outing against Newcastle on the 26th. Stephen's Day in Ireland, Boxing Day across the pond, and the prospect of what is another fixture full of talking points. Naturally, the starting 11 is going to be fascinating, and it's going to consume so much time. If I had to guess, and as I'm thinking now, on what we would see, I think we might see Lamens, Yoro, Heaven, Shaw, Dallo, Mount, Casemiro, Dorgu, Xerxes, Cunha and Sesko. Now, I would have put Martinez in there. He'd be my first name there. But Newcastle are a big side, and despite what we have already discussed about Yoro, we need height. Furthermore, Shaw is fitter than Martinez right now. And there is also the possibility that we see Ugarte coming in beside Casemiro to target an aggressive Geordie midfield. But I think it's fair to say that he would need to be far better than what we saw against Villa, because it just wasn't good enough. You look at the fixture as a whole and what we can anticipate. Newcastle have won 5 of the last 6 meetings between the sides. That said, one of those was a League Cup fixture, mind. But the Premier League outings have gone in their favour, and that includes a 2-0 defeat the last time that we met in Manchester. But there is a lot to be said about form away from home. It's not all going to plan for Newcastle. Eddie Howe has only collected 1 road win this season. And you got to remember, he also lost to Sunderland in the previous trip, and that really hurt them. I think it's difficult to put your finger on how this will play out, given the unknown variables about United's squad. But I can't help but feel that there is a confidence within the players available. And although I did get my prediction wrong against Villa, I'll put my hands up. I will say, though, that was due to a lack of clinical finishing. That must be said. I have a feeling that we will come good against Newcastle and put pressure on the sides competing for European places. Now, you can choose to shout at me about that one all you like. I welcome every bit of it. But I just have this feeling that there is something there within this group, and confidence is there despite that result at Villa Park. So that is 2025 done and dusted. I would like to thank you all for the continued support throughout the year. You know, we've seen massive growth throughout every avenue at the Theatre of Red, from the podcast to the website and all of the social channels. We do genuinely cherish each and every one of you. That's why every email you send and every message that you write on social media, we will always do our best to respond to it. I would like to wish you all a very happy festive period if you celebrate. And if you don't, I hope you have a lovely week and a weekend doing whatever it is you enjoy to do with yourself or with your family. We will be back in the new year. I think I deserve a little bit of a break, don't you? But the content will continue across site and socials. So be sure to stay in touch. Continue sending your emails through to editor-of-red.com. Continue connecting with us across all of our social channels. We are always happy to talk. And until we meet again, much love to you all, folks. Enjoy all that you do over the coming weeks, and a very happy new year to you all.